Well, good evening, boys and girls. Guess what? We are starting our bedtime stories. Every Monday night, join us here on Facebook and we get to do bedtime stories together. My friends, the Krugs, well, they went ahead and they shared one of their favorite bedtime stories with me so I can share it with all of you. Isn't that so cool? Well, hey, today we're going to start our adventure in the Imagination Station. We're starting with Attack at the Arena. I cannot wait to be able to get to see what this book has in store for us today. Here we go. Let's go ahead and start with Chapter 1. Chapter 1, The Second Trip. Patrick, Beth, and Mr. Whitaker were at wit's end on Tuesday morning. They were in the workshop getting ready for the Roman adventure. Beth came out of the girls' changing room. Patrick came out of the boys' changing room soon afterward. The cousins were curious about their ancient Roman costumes. "Why did you give me a plain dress?" Beth said. "The cloth is rough, and the only thing pretty about it is the gold border." She looked down at the gray tunic. It reached to her ankles. The tunic was not long enough to cover her leather sandals. "You need to blend in," Mr. Whitaker said. "As what?" Beth asked. "Well, a slave," Mr. Whitaker said. There were lots of slaves in ancient Rome. "A slave?" Beth said. "No." "Don't complain," Patrick said. "I have to wear a bathrobe." Mr. Whitaker laughed. "It's not a bathrobe," he said. "The ancient Romans wore robes and tunics." "But the belt is a rope," Patrick said, "and the hood is weird. When I put it on, I look creepy." "No one in Rome will think you look creepy," Mr. Whitaker said. "In fact, that kind of robe was a sign of peace. It's what monks wore." "Monks?" Beth asked. "A monk is a holy man," Mr. Whitaker said. "They can live anywhere." "I'm going to be a holy man," Patrick asked. "But I can't even sit still in church." "It's better than being a slave," said Beth. The cousins walked to the Imagination Station. It reminded Patrick of the front of the helicopter. He looked at Beth and smiled. She smiled back. The cousins wanted to get on. They climbed inside the Imagination Station. Patrick and Beth both looked carefully at the dashboard. A red button was in the center. Around it were dials, levers, and flashing lights. On top of the dashboard were two letters, two very old and mysterious letters. I wonder what those letters are going to be. I think we have time for another chapter. What do you guys think? Okay, here we go. We're going to go move on to Chapter 2. Chapter 2, The Gifts. "Where is the blue sunstone?" Beth asked Mr. Whitaker. "It's not inside the Imagination Station anymore." "I put it on the dashboard last night," Mr. Whitaker said. "It was gone this morning. I think whoever wrote the letters took the sunstone." "But how could that happen?" Beth asked. "I'm trying to figure that out," Mr. Whitaker said. "I thought all the controls are here," Patrick said. Mr. Whitaker frowned. "I built a remote control for the machine," he said. "I took it with me on my last adventure. I accidentally left it there." "Well, can't you go back to get it?" Beth asked. "I would if the Imagination Station would let me," Mr. Whitaker said. "It won't work for me right now. I'm trying to find out why." "But who is Albert?" Patrick asked. "Albert is an ancestor of mine from many, many years ago," he said. "I want to write a family history," Mr. Whitaker said. "I took trips in the Imagination Station to meet my ancestors. I met Albert, and now he's in trouble." "That's what the second letter says," Patrick said. "Albert needs more help." Mr. Whitaker reached inside the Imagination Station. A fancy ring appeared on his finger. It was a square of gold with a rose engraved in the middle. The square had 8 tiny pearls around the edge. "Your ring keeps appearing and disappearing," Beth said. "It was a gift from Albert," Mr. Whitaker said. "You can only see it when my hand is in the machine." He picked up the letter and read, "More trouble for Albert. Lord Darkthorn is angry. The Roman monks Silver cup is missing. We need it before new moon. May God be with you. Mr. Whitaker put down the letter. He took his hand out of the imagination station. The fancy ring disappeared. Is there anything special about the silver cup we have to find? Patrick asked. There might be hundreds of them in Rome. It's a monk's cup, Mr. Whitaker said. Patrick suddenly smiled. That's why you have me dressed like this, he said. A monk's cup? Beth asked. A monk's cup looks like a goblet, Mr. Whitaker said. Some people call it a chalice. What's so special about it? Patrick asked. Mr. Whitaker said, a monk would use one in a holy ceremony called the Lord's Supper or communion. Well, we won't find it sitting here, Beth said. She wiggled in her seat. You're right, Beth, Mr. Whitaker said. But first, I have something else for you. He walked over to the computer desk and picked up 2 items. He brought them back to the imagination station. Mr. Whitaker handed Patrick a wide metal armband. It had rubies in it. Wear that high on your arm, Mr. Whitaker said. Keep it hidden under your robe. What's it for? Patrick asked. A man will ask you for something of value, Mr. Whitaker said. Use this. Patrick nodded. Mr. Whitaker gave a little leather pouch to Beth. This is birdseed, she said. Birdseed? Don't Romans get enough to eat? She tucked the pouch in her belt. You'll understand when the time comes, Mr. Whitaker said. He gave Beth a knowing wink. Mr. Whitaker closed the imagination station's doors. Beth pushed the red button. The imagination started to shake, then it rumbled and it seemed to move. Beth took a quick breath, closed her eyes, and the machine jerked forward. Patrick felt as if he were on the subway. He pushed his body into the seat and waited. The grumble grew louder. The machine whirled, and suddenly everything went black. Well, that's where we're going to stop our time for today. Join us next Monday as we continue on with the Imagination Station attack at the arena. We'll get to see where Beth and her cousin, Patrick, end up. Thank you guys for joining me. I hope you guys have a great night's sleep tonight. Enjoy the rest of your week and join us next week.